Well, welcome. Tonight, we're going to meet somebody who wants your vote, somebody who's willing to help Milford, somebody whose family's from around here.
Yes.
So let's start off with an introduction.
Okay. Do you mind if I
And
do
actually,
that?
since we're 8 feet apart, we can take off
That's
our masks for
right,
now.
That's right. Thank you so much. Whew, that feels good. Yes. First of all, I want to say thank you for having me. And I say this to every one of the cable stations that I go in. I think cable's a great thing. I don't say that just to get you all pumped up and be nice to me. I really think it's great. So I want to say to all the cable stations out there, keep doing what you're doing. Very, very important. I think you give the right message out to people, so thank you. I do come from this area, actually. My family, I was raised in Walpole. And that was a time when Walpole was just a suburban, an urban, I guess, not urban, excuse me, but out in the suburbs, very, very small town, not like it is today. It's a little bit different, today. But when I grew up in Walpole, I had a family. We had seven of us in the family, and my brothers and sisters. We all, went to Walpole High School, every one of us. But my father worked 2 jobs, and that's the thing I say to a lot of people. I'm a very working class, middle class. I don't use the word middle class so much because that means so much different things to different people, but I think working class, those kinds of values. So I had a dad that worked 2 jobs, and my mother also worked, and she was a nurse. And she would get home after her shift, 7 o'clock in the morning, to get seven little hauls off to school every morning. And I think that when people ask me why I'm running for this seat, that's one of the main reasons. I think that my values that I have and bring where I am, and geographically, if you look at it, Walpole was kind of geographically in the middle. Now I live in Attleboro, which is a wonderful city, but it's a small town city. Again, it has a small town feel. I like that. The things that we have that challenge us are different from Newton, Wellesley, and Brookline. Very, very different. And nothing to say bad about those places, but the majority of people down here are working class professional people that struggle. And I think that's the point that I try to make to people. We haven't had anyone represent us, either a conservative voice, any kind of a voice, if you would. I am a conservative. I'm running on the Republican ticket. But I think people ask me about my conservatism. When you grow up in a family with 7 children, you learn very early how to stretch a buck. So I think from the very beginning of my life, I was always a fiscal conservative, and that just kind of stuck with me. And the other thing, I am in the military, was in the military for 30 years of my life.
Now, did you earn a full bird?
I did.
That seems rare, isn't it?
It is rare. It's rare, and it's rare the way I did it also. I started off in 1978 as an airman. We call it a slick sleeve, nothing. Very, very bottom, and worked my way up, went to school, went to college, and then, of course, I made the grade right below general. I always say the next step would have been general, but colonel is what I made, and I'm very proud of that. But it was a struggle when I first started. People were always trying to challenge me on my competency because I was a woman. And that's unfortunate. I know a lot of people go through that. But that was very difficult because it was almost like everywhere I went, there was that challenge. And it made me very strong and very competent. I realized I had to know more than the average person out there, and I made it my point to know more than the average person out there. I worked harder. I think I studied harder. I did very, very well in school. Because of it, I wanted to be the best, and that could really just be part of my personality, but I did want to be the best, and same here for this seat. I want to do the best job that I possibly can for the people of District 4. It's always been the way I've run my life. That's the value I have. I think the military was just a great supplement to that. So, yeah, it was a good career, very, very good career.
Well, thank you for your service.
Well, thank you.
My hat is off because making full colonel is impressive.
Thank you.
Making it in the Air Force? I mean, at least you think in the Army you got a lot more slots to compete for.
Right.
The Air Force, the Marines, I start thinking that you got to really have something.
Yeah, I think one of the things is I was always one of, because I was a hospital administrator. And it's to show you kind of how, I don't want to say it wasn't the perception whenever I went around and sat at the table with the generals and the other colonels when I was a young officer, and I would sit at the table and I'd talk about the construction going on in the hospital and all the different budget things. And I remember one time a general said to me, "You're awful smart for a nurse." And I said, "Whoa." You know, of course, all the people behind me were like, "Oh my gosh." And I had great friends that were nurses, but I was not a nurse. And I ran the hospital. That's what I did. I was an operations officer, but it was usually only one female in that whole group. The majority of people in that group were male. So that was a little bit difficult. I actually go around and speak to young women who are going into the business environment, like engineering and some of the other professions, professional careers. I speak to a lot of women that are thinking of going to the military because I want to get them prepared. I don't want them to
How
go.
do you prepare them? I mean, I come from a family of all women.
Yes.
My darling bride, who, thank God, years ago, she made a mistake and married down because she's so much smarter at everything than I am. But we worked together for 14 years at 4 different companies. And it used to be kind of enjoyable for me to watch her go in, and she's a biochemist by training. But you'd get these surgeons who would kind of assume that as a woman that she couldn't know that much or not as much.
Yes.
And then it was almost predictable that you'd see her saying, "Okay, ready, let's play submarine, dive. How technical do you want to go?" And you'd see her take them down. And these are world-class surgeons. And she'd take them so deep till finally you could see them saying, "Okay,
I quit.
you're there." But how do you tell young people? You know, because I took pride in drubbing into my daughters that you can complain about the glass ceiling or put your head down and bust through it. And if there's somebody, because of an alternate plumbing structure, that thinks you're not as good or better than them, run over them. But that's an old man talking.
But you know what? Thank you for doing that. I want to say thank you. My dad, and this was back in the day, said the same thing to me. He said, "Don't ever let anybody tell you you can't do something." He just had no idea what he was telling me because off I went. So what I try to tell them is information is power. And if you are deprived in any kind of an environment from that information, that's going to be very, very difficult. So if you ever get yourself into a situation where you get ostracized because of, something that was said, and this is what's very difficult to tell women, is that you've got to figure out a game plan before you even go of how you're going to handle things. And I tell them that. Don't get yourself there and then try to figure out the game plan. If you have to go out for drinks. You can figure out your game plan, which is to tell the bartender, "Please just bring me soda water and a lime." But you have to figure that out, because if you don't go out for drinks with the guys, if you would, that's where a lot of information gets shared. That's where a lot of networking is done. So I tell them, plan on these things, have a game plan before you get into a situation, because it will happen. It will happen. I'm sure your wife told you those kinds of things. And people will try to test you. And I love what you described. There's a lot of mental energy that has to get expounded every time you have to do that over and over and over again in your career. I've had to do that many times. I went to a new base, they were trying to test me again. Yeah. So, one of the things that became very difficult, you have to kind of go in there very, very strong. And that's okay. And then I eased up after people got to know me. And I remember people telling me, and of course, I don't know if you could see here on TV, but I'm 5 feet tall. So people used to say, "I don't know how anybody, listened to a 5 foot tall colonel," but they did. I had my way with that, and you have to be very stern, but at the same time, you have to be really good to people too, and you have to take care of your troops. If you take care of the people that work for you, and you treat them fairly, they're going to do anything for you. So that's the things I've learned the most.
The part that always perplexes me is when you see some of these men looking down at women. Mm-hmm. I sit there and think about it. Maybe he doesn't have a wife, so he doesn't understand. Maybe he doesn't have daughters, so he doesn't understand. But he's got to have a mother.
Yeah.
How could you set a stage, and I'm not saying I do everything right, I try, but to set the stage to put my daughters,
Right.
my darling bride I don't have to worry about, she'd blow through anybody. But the fact that she has to is annoying.
Exactly.
It's
My
just,
point.
we used to go to different accounts and she looked at me and says, they let you in the door because you're male. I never thought about it till I started watching.
Mm-hmm.
And then sure enough, I realized she was working a heck of a lot harder because she had to go through that quiz before they let her in. And for me, they kind of assumed I knew what I was talking about.
Yes, I agree with that. I think that's what it is. You have to show that competency. You're always, when women in the military used to talk all the time, we say 150%. Always have to stay at 150%. Now, I raised my son as a single parent, too.
Wow.
And I commanded troops. Even in the medical career field, there came a time where the medics were kind of put in a support role. As we moved along, it caused us difficulties because we didn't have the command experience that some of the other agencies had, and we couldn't compete with them for higher positions like colonel and general and so forth. So they changed that a little bit, and they allowed some of the folks to become commanders. So because I was a hospital administrator and ran hospitals, I also had the opportunity to command a squadron, and I commanded twice. And that's a great responsibility, but a great feeling to be able to help people. People always say, oh, they see on TV how, people are always, they see the negative things, I think, sometimes. But the military is a great environment. We work together. I have friends now that they see me running for office. They're on my Facebook saying, go Jules. I love that. I love that when I see that. We watch what they do. We see our kids grow up together. We know each other by name. People used to come home to my parents' house. An interesting New England story. I used to rave about Thanksgiving up in New England and the big dinners that we had and how the whole family gets together, and that you could go from one city or town to the other in possibly 5 minutes, and how beautiful that was. It ended up that every time Thanksgiving came around, all the women from the barracks would come and get in the car, and we'd drive up, straight up, all the way back to Massachusetts to spend with my family, and they loved it. So my mother always figured, hey, she already had, there's 9 in the family.
What's
Couple
half a
more.
dozen more?
Yes, exactly. So it was wonderful. Wonderful New England Thanksgiving.
So, Julie Hall for Congress.
Yes.
I'm from Milford.
Yes.
Why should I vote for you?
I think part of it is what I described earlier. I feel that we have shared values here. I think the way I grew up, which is more prevalent to how other families in this area have grown up too, where they have parents that work, where they have parents that worry about how they're going to send their kids to college. Things are so competitive now, like where kids go to school. It's just crazy. I'm a huge fan of community college, and I think one of the things that we have around here, which is great, is we have great community colleges and great trade schools, which is great. We can talk about that. But you should vote for me because, partly because of that, I think that's really important. I think a person's character that matches yours is probably most important, in my opinion, because you want people who are going to sort of see things the way you do. I do have a lot of my own beliefs, and I try to tell people all the time, I'm not here to push my beliefs. I'm here to represent the people in District 4. So if you think about that, if our value systems sort of match a little bit better, there's probably a higher probability that I'm going to make decisions that are going to benefit you more than someone who, I'm going to say, comes from a very affluent family and a very connected family. I'm not from an affluent family, and my only claim to fame, I think, and this may not even be true, is Lizzie Borden. I think my father lived in Rhode Island, and we have sort of this story that we're related to her. But I don't come from a famous family, but I come from a very, very nice, very solid middle-class family. We have a lot of brothers and sisters. We're all good to each other. Most of them live in this district. So here's another reason why you should vote for me. my brothers and sisters are going to make sure, for your benefit, that I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do for this district. The other thing is, was in the military. I have a lot of experiences. I have a lot of experience. I have a lot of education, book knowledge, but I have that book knowledge, and I validate that book knowledge with the experiences that I've had in the military. And I think that's very important, because that's how you really form and really test what's real, what's not real, what are you learning, what's practical. And I have very, very practical common sense.
I would buy you could get away with book knowledge up to lieutenant, captain,
Yes, that's correct.
maybe captain. But colonel, you got to have a lot more than just book
That's correct.
knowledge to make colonel.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, that's one step before you trade in the big bird for some stars.
That's correct. So you do
Impressive.
have to. Yeah. And the good thing is the military is very good about training us. I have a lot of leadership experience. They make sure that the people that they move forward are trained. And if it doesn't catch on, you don't go forward. So if anything I can say is that I've sort of been validated by the United States military that what I have said I'm going to do, and I did it well.
So tell me about health care.
Yes. So I tell people for 26 years of my life, I worked in a 100% taxpayer-funded healthcare system. Now, bring that back to what I said originally about being able to stretch a buck. I am very, very accountable. And every time I was, wherever I went, I kept thinking about my parents back in Massachusetts, and that this was their money, and all the people back here, that I am being responsible for spending their dollars. Now, of course, this came from taxpayers from all over the United States, but that was my reference point. So I made sure that I was accountable. That doesn't happen all the time in government. Oh, what a surprise. That doesn't happen all the time in government. So I can tell you, even though we were able, and I was an accountable person and then tried my best, we were able to keep a control over the largest part of a budget, which is personnel, salary costs. We got paid by our rank, and not by whether we were a neurosurgeon or an administrator or cardiologist or a nurse. We got paid by rank. So we knew exactly how much that budget, part of the budget. On the outside world, in the civilian sector, you don't know. And that balloons out. Even controlling that part of the budget, our costs still went up. So, to me, I say that's not the answer. The answer is to try to inject, and we did. And the military finally did, sort of in the last, I would say, 10 years that I was there. They told me to go out and start contracting, just like a civilian organization, which I did. The first time I tried this was in the middle of the desert, where there was one hospital. And to actually go out and compete, it's very difficult to do that, but I did it. I did it, and I had people that were able to give me a discount, and that saved money for the government. So here you see, it wasn't the fact that I was now in a 100% taxpayer-funded or socialized medical system. It was because we injected the market value into the system. All the values and all the techniques of being capitalism or market are now being injected into the system. So when I talk about healthcare with people, that's the way we need to move again. And I say again, because that's the way it was before. We have to do it carefully. We have to do it slowly. Everything that I think gets proposed by any congressperson, it should be something that shows a very slow increment. And then we should check, is this working, is it not working? What we absolutely do not want to happen is that somebody gets left without health care. Absolutely not. So we have to be very, very careful about doing that. But it's injecting that competition back in. There's always going to be Medicare and Medicaid. That's fine. Those programs are excellent programs, and we need to continue with that because there are people that aren't just going to be able to work, those kinds of things. I'd like to see a situation where the money is transferred over to businesses. People are probably like, what? But I want to see that because I think it should be incentivized. I think that the businesses should be incentivized. They can attract good people, and they can keep a very, very strong workforce. Those are the things that we want to help our economy get better. So I can see sort of a hand-in-hand thing going on here. The other thing is, as you make a profit, and I'm sorry, because I'm a hospital administrator, I go on this one, so I'll leave it very quickly. you have to make a profit. We changed, when I say we, the healthcare environment changed the words from nonprofit back in the day to not-for-profit. And the reason why they did that is because you have to make a profit in order to bring in new technology to help subsidize some of the other programs you have going on.
Keep the doors open.
Absolutely. So I think, and I can go on because I could go into detail, but that's generally what I want. But again, the biggest thing I say is we do it slowly. We make sure that nobody gets left behind.
Well, you start talking about you don't want anybody to lose their health care. And immediately you start thinking about non-documented, illegal, whatever you want to, put a label on.
Sure.
But I know our medical center, Jeff Hopkins, who runs the ER, has told me, he never asks, do you have Visa or MasterCard?
Yeah.
You come, you're sick, he takes care of you. What are your thoughts on how do we deal with the health care, but in general, the border security and immigration issues?
Sure. So, I think this comes down to the word illegal. And, I'll just cut to the chase. So there are people here on visas that are here to go to school. There are people here to work because we want them to come into work. They have certain skill sets that we don't have here, which is another thing we have to fix. But there are people here. So we have to differentiate between people that are here in this country legally and people that are not here legally. And I read almost every day the U.S. Customs reports. I just like to read, and I like to see these things. And the types of people that Homeland Security and Customs are turning around out of this country is, you would be appalled at the things. Let's just say ICE and Homeland Defense working together, they're turning out of this country some bad people. And thank God for them, that they're finding these people and turning them out. Yeah, we always hear the stories about, the people, ICE is going after these people that have been here. But again, we're talking about the difference between illegal and legal. I'm a huge advocate of people becoming citizens of the United States. If you become a citizen of the United States, then you can partake in what the citizens of the United States have. I do believe that allowing people this short period of time that we have now, this extension on DACA, to get their citizenship is the right thing to do. The problem was, if I understand it correctly, is this was already said. You got X amount of years to get it, and then it just kind of went by the wayside, and now people are coming back and saying, wait a minute, you should have, So I think we can reestablish that. We need to reestablish that, but this time we need to make sure that we follow through with what we're going to say and that people do get their citizenship by the time that they are. I have helped people fill out those applications. I think you need a PhD. All right, I'm going to say it right here. If I want people to become citizens, if I think that that's the best thing, I'm willing to put the time and effort into reforming that process that they have to go through. Not to make the vetting easier, but to make the actual filling out the process, the papers, a lot easier, because it's cumbersome, and onerous, and it needs to be reformed.
The part I don't understand is, if I invite you into my home and you start breaking my furniture, I think I have a right to tell you to leave. So, we're all immigrants, unless you trace yourself back far enough. But my grandfather came here because he filled out the paperwork, came in legally. People in Milford gave him a chance. So his $32.80 that he had in his pocket, he built from there. But for these immigrants who come in and get involved in murder, drugs, illegal activities,
Sure.
How do I have any compassion for them?
It's very, very, very difficult. And I think you're saying the right thing, which is these people are here illegally. They're here for malintent. I'm going to take you down to the border. I was stationed at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico, which was just probably 2 hours north of El Paso. I had the honor of meeting one of the senior Border Patrol agents who spoke a lot about what happened on the border and how dangerous it was for the people coming over because of the drug situation there. these people that are bringing drugs into this country don't have the value for the human life that we have. And when we see it, when people coming over, they think, oh, you're going to separate the kids from the parents. Well, I'm here to tell you, I have a personal situation or a personal story of a family member, not from the Mexican border, but up in the Canadian border, where my dad got a phone call one day and said, is your daughter, said her name, and he says, yes. Well, she's traveling here with 2 people that claim to be her parents. Okay, so when people tell me, oh, you don't separate the parents from the children, there is a valid reason why that is happening. And we're doing it for the protection of those children. So you really have to understand, you have to look a little bit more into it than just what it looks like from the outside. I also had a situation with our healthcare system that some of the people would come over, especially women that were pregnant and they wanted their children delivered in the United States, but the first place they would go was to the military hospital. We were funded to take care of GIs. We weren't funded to take care of civilians. It became a huge issue in our healthcare network there as to how we were going to get funding. And you know, that's another thing. The United States government steps in many different ways to help out. And so we were able to get money, additional money down there so we could continue to do that properly. In Korea, same thing. I was stationed in Korea. I, as a woman, could not go over there pregnant because we didn't have an obstetrician there. But the GIs would meet women and marry them. And sure enough, 9 months later, in our emergency room, we now have to declare an emergency and helicopter women and babies up to the larger Army hospital. So again, people don't realize how the government does step in and help with these things. They don't hear the positive stories about what the government does in trying to take care of some of these things. Shouldn't have to, but we do. So it's very important to go back that we do have a strong border to keep out the bad people, but also to make sure that the people that are coming over here safely and for the right reason, and that we're preparing for them and they're doing it properly, because nobody wants to get into a situation. It's just unhealthy for those folks too, just very dangerous for those folks too.
When you talk about dangerous, I pick up the paper and I read about protests.
Yes,
And it scares me.
sure does.
I mean, the pesky First Amendment is something that we all live by. It's always there, and to me, one of the most important amendments we have. A little while ago, we had a Black Lives Matter parade or protest, not a protest, but a demonstration.
Sure.
And the one in Milford, I could support 100%. People, according to their First Amendment right, started in one end of Milford, held up their signs, said their piece, walked to the other end of Milford, and went home. To me, you can't not support them.
That's correct.
Now, if they had stopped halfway and looted or
Sure.
set places afire, I'd probably have a different opinion.
Yes.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. People have the right to express themselves. And I'm a huge person on supporting the Constitution. I think that the Constitution is something that we get, and I learned this, as I evolve and I learn different things, the Constitution, it's unalienable rights. You don't have to earn those rights. Those are given to you. What it's our job to do is to protect those. So if somebody is out there peacefully giving their rights, that's one thing. But when it crosses the line to where it starts to infringe upon other rights, like other people's property, other people's lives, most of what we see, which I think is very scary and dangerous, and as a mother, I'm here to tell you, I see this happening in the suburbs. That's something we have not quite seen. And that's something new that's come around to our environment, is seeing looting and violence coming out to the suburbs. That scares people. It should scare people anywhere they go. But the response to it is not to take away money from the police. The response to that is to strengthen your police department and help them improve themselves. I think the police in Massachusetts have seen a lot of these things early on. I commend them for that, to be quite honest with you. I know I've spoken to my own chief of police in Attleboro. We've talked many, many years since I've been on the city council about problem-oriented policing, which is a whole different way. What they try to do is they try to work with the person and find out why that person is committing a crime. They have been asking for years for more money for social workers and for caseworkers. And I'm on my council, and I can tell you, we've had difficulty funding that for them. Now, here it is. What's the proposal people are saying? We should have social workers and caseworkers. You certainly don't want to send the social work and caseworkers out there on their own. That's an absolutely horrible idea. I worked in mental health for 6.5 years, too. I know what happens when a domestic, if somebody opens that door, sometimes that's the last time that door gets open on that person. So we have to be careful.
I get a kick out of only send the social workers into safe situations. I wonder if the 2 cops that were sitting in their police car who got gunned down for no explanation thought they were in a safe situation. When I hear defund, now I've worked on enough police budgets that when you had to shrink or
Sure.
take away some money, first place that goes away is training.
Absolutely, yeah.
Police chief, I've not met one that would fire a person if they could save the cop by cutting training or materials. So it almost seems
It's counterproductive.
counterproductive.
Yeah, it's counterproductive. The other thing that's counterproductive is the majority of the diversity in these police forces is the younger officers. The gay officer, the African-American officer, you name it, the women. And I've met a lot of them. I've seen the makeup of our police forces. They've done a great job. But now if you start cutting people, you can't say, okay, well, I'm going to pick and choose the people I want to cut. You might be cutting somebody from that police force who they're the first one in their family. And they're so proud. So again, I find that whole discussion to be counterproductive.
But Jules, it's not you might be. By union rules, I mean, if you think about it, over the last generation, we've identified the benefit of having a police force that looks, feels, acts like their neighborhood.
Yes.
But if you got to chop off 10%, by union rules, it's going to be the last 10% that you hired that go
Correct.
away.
Absolutely. So it's just, again, counterproductive thinking. And I say to myself, these folks aren't thinking this through very, very well. And I always talk about downrange. I bring that up a lot, that when you make decisions, you have to do your absolutely very best to see what's going to happen downrange. What's the collateral damage? And these are military terms, but we all know what this means. We have to look far enough ahead and be very careful. And I've mentioned this about the healthcare thing. I mentioned about energy. When we talk about energy and shifting over to doing some things that might be a little bit more beneficial for us and take care of our planet a little bit more. Again, I am not for flicking a switch and saying in this short period of time, we're going to change all these things. I think that, again, is very counterproductive. We have a period right now with energy where we are not energy dependent on another country, which I think is wonderful, that we are not being bound, being a military person, by our dependency on foreign oil. We should take this time that we have, a beautiful time that we have, to be able to explore some of these other, and again, using the market, using companies, and saying this is where we want to go. We want to see more about solar. Solar right now is very difficult. People tell me, you don't get a lot of energy from it, and if the sun goes down and so forth. So there's a lot of technological problems that have to be solved. The people that have solved those technological problems have been the businesses. And so, again, we can't, when government gets involved, I haven't seen many programs where government gets involved that have turned out to be very well run.
Well, as you think through it and you say, we're just going to mandate something, how efficient does that work?
Again, I think things through very carefully. My mind has been trained that way, and I could never go to my general and say to my general, you should do this, without making sure that I did a lot of research, because if that did happen and a decision was made and people's lives were put at risk, again, I was in a situation where that absolutely could be the answer, that people's lives were put at risk. You have to be very, very careful. Now, oftentimes you don't have time. You know, there's a saying we used to have, not enough time, information, or money,
Yeah.
and you have to make good decisions. So that's why it's important to have a senior person who's used to training that way, who has a lot of experience, who can make those decisions for the people. I feel in this district, I'm that person. I have a lot of experience. I have senior leadership, many, many experiences. My decisions, because of that, are going to be a little bit more well-rounded than a lot of other people because of the experience I've had in my life. But you have to be very careful. You can't just flick a switch, and always have a plan B. Always.
Well, you know, I look and I listen to this whole idea of we're going to have a socialist utopia. You know, I almost hear Marx laughing, saying, from those according to their abilities to those according to their needs. And then I sit there and say, well, wait a minute. That's like saying world peace. We should not need a military.
Correct.
Yeah.
If everybody was kind to each other,
If world
That's
peace
right.
was something achievable, we would not need a military. But yet I turn around and say, where has that worked?
yeah.
You know, so again, you start looking at the whole idea. I cannot fight the idea that the new Green Deal will be perfect. And what was it that Maggie Thatcher said? Socialism is the best form of government till you run out of other people's money.
Correct. Until it worked. They say it works until it doesn't, till all of a sudden it doesn't work. Like Venezuela is a perfect example of that. People held that out for a long time as the perfect example, and then all of a sudden it crashes. I have a young friend that she's from Russia, and she talks to me a lot about what happens in Russia. And what she says is, if you have money, you
Life
will
is
be
good.
pushed along the line. And she's very blatant about it. But for the rest of the people, the majority of people, they wait in the bread line. They wait for their car insurance. If you have an accident, she said it could take up to a year unless you have money. And so that's what happens, unfortunately. We're human beings. If human beings were wonderful,
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, nobody can argue. World peace,
yeah,
the socialist utopia. If the world was perfect, we wouldn't have colonels. Thank God we do.
that's good.
Now,
Yeah.
that kind of gets into Second Amendment.
Yes,
Your thoughts?
yes. I am pro Second Amendment. Someone had a conversation with me today about automatic, or military grade weapons, and I actually had to read up about these when I was filling out some of these surveys. I am definitely pro Second Amendment, and I'm going to tell you, when I was in the military, I boasted about Massachusetts, how we were the first state with the shot heard around the world, and we went against Britain because we wanted the right to bear arms. What does that mean? They were coming after our stronghold of where the patriots kept their weapons. They were farmers, for goodness sakes. But they did not want to be left without being able to protect themselves. So to me, I just thought, this is the greatest thing. It wasn't about taking arms and now we're going to have a big war. I mean, they were definitely outnumbered when it came to it, but they had a passion that they wanted to be free, that they wanted their rights, they wanted to be able to protect themselves, and that pressure was coming from a sovereignty. So what I say is, I make a point too, that when we broke off away from Britain, away from the English, it wasn't because we didn't want rules. It was because we didn't want their rules. What's the first thing that our founding fathers did? They made rules. They put in law and order because they knew that you cannot move on with a civilized society without some kind of law and order. So people say, well, we broke away from England and we didn't like this, so why are we putting rules in again? It wasn't that, so I try to make that point. But again, with the Second Amendment, I think it is, it's a right. I mean, in my mind, I think it's very important. Now, somebody asked me again, should there be a federal law? I do not believe that. Just like I believe all health care is local, even those decisions made are different. We're in Massachusetts. We're going to have a different perspective on, we've got a dense population here. We should look at things a little bit different. The other thing we talked about was IDing. I thought about this a lot, and at first I thought, this is a great idea, you should know. But then as I read on and really thought in my own mind, which I do a lot, I do think in my own mind, despite what people think. I have a lot of experience, and I do think, I talked to the police officers also, and they told me the majority of people who commit the crimes are not the people who are the gun owners. There's somebody who stole the gun and are committing the crimes. So if you're trying to ID the person and be able to do that, and the crimes are not being committed by those people, it's almost counterproductive to
Jules,
me.
I remember when the trigger guard came out. The law, you should have trigger guard, you must have trigger guard. Okay, I own a shotgun. I went out that weekend and bought a trigger guard.
Yep.
And then I thought, I wonder how many drug dealers with illegal weapons went down to Bass Pro Shops and bought trigger guards so they would be compliant.
Yeah, that's the example, perfect example of what I'm talking about. When you put laws into effect, you have to make sure that the outcome is clear. What is the outcome that we're going for?
We've been criticized here in Milford because we voted to put in our own SWAT team. I remember when the police chief came to us, and they went on with all the justification, but then he said something that the chairman and I looked at each other when he said, we have a great regional SWAT team. It can be here within 42 minutes. All the shootings so far have been over in 18. And I looked at Chris and I said, my God, if we don't support this, and God forbid something happens, how could I look at a mother or a father straight in the eyes and say, sorry, I saved money? I mean, this whole idea of where do you draw the line? I'm not smart enough to know. But at that point, for a little bit of money, and for us a lot, we're a small town.
Right.
It was a lot of money. But if it saved one, I got 4,400 kids in the school system.
Right.
And every one of them bleeds Milford red. The last thing in the world I want is harm to come to them.
Absolutely.
So I don't understand, like you bring up militarization of the police department. Boy, I think no policeman should have a gun. They should walk in with a cane and hit people.
Right.
But if you put a uniform on me, I want a howitzer. Because if I'm going into a gang-related incident and they've got automatic weapons, don't tell me I'm going in there with a cane because it's politically correct.
And that's how what I call the downrange thinking, okay? You have people that, the reason why the police have what they have is because of what other people on the street has. And it's that, and this is very simple, as that gets upped, then we have to be able to counteract that. Again, we want to figure out a way to come down. But there we go. How do you do that again? When you have people, do we go out and tell the people that are committing crimes, listen, we would rather that you didn't use that kind of a weapon because we can't counteract that. But again, like you said, and I absolutely agree, but we never want to be put in a situation where we have to explain to a parent why we downgraded and that something happened and we weren't able to counteract it. My opinion of the police is they do the very best that they can to keep things from happening. They aren't going out there hunting down people despite what you see on TV and what you hear. They aren't packs of police. Are there bad police out there? Absolutely, and those police should be held accountable. And the police themselves should be ensuring that their agency stays above board. And I believe that is what we see happening here in the state of Massachusetts. I honestly believe that. They're trying to, nobody wants to have to explain to other people why a rogue cop went. For the majority of them, they're very, very decent people. I have a lot of friends that
But
do police.
it's like when people say, I don't understand how somebody could go to a school and gun down kindergartners. I sat there and said, if you understood that person, then your brain has to be backwired because there's no way of explaining how you could hurt a child.
Absolutely. And that's the other thing, too. How do you know? Now, I've worked in mental health. I have a degree in psychology, and I also worked in mental health for 6.5 years before I became an officer. I've seen people do some pretty crazy things. And you never know. Some of these people, actually, I lived and worked with every day. And then, you know, I worked up on the 4th floor. That elevator would open, and here would be one of my folks from my dormitory having such a stressful issue, I didn't even know who that person was anymore. So could I have predicted that that person was going to be the next person that was going to go grab a gun? No. That's the difficulties. People think that, oh, we should have seen this coming. We should have seen this happening. When a husband and a wife fight, and for some reason a crime of passion happens, could we foresee that? In retrospect, you always can.
No.
Okay, but you know, that's the problem.
Jules, in retrospect, I could have told you how many times the Patriots should have passed instead of run on yesterday's game.
Yes.
In retrospect, I could be a billionaire because I can pick yesterday's lottery number every time correctly.
That's correct. We just can't do that. There are some screening processes. I agree, there should be some screening process, but again, you're only weeding out a small amount of those people from that. The people that are committing these crimes, as you said, there is no rhyme or reason. And, you know, people should have done this or should have done this. So what do we have to do? The best thing we have to do is make sure we have a very, very strong law enforcement presence. One of the things they're talking about, which is sad to me, because I've worked with the DARE program as long as I've been on the municipal council, those DARE officers are amazing. Those are the resource officers that are in the schools the majority of the time. And they told me that there are things that some of those children will tell them about what's going on at home that they will not tell anybody else in that school. So this is a devastating thought to think that we want to remove these people, even just for that reason. Let's not even talk about the protection reason and keeping the kids safe. That these kids are looking up to these folks.
But see, that to me is critical. You know, if the police in the schools did nothing but foster a cooperative environment for these kids growing up, that they look up to the police, that's worth it right there to me.
Absolutely, I agree 100%. And the last I was on my council, they wanted to spread this all the way through down into the elementary and follow these children all the way through with the same resource officer. I said, what a concept. But nope, don't have the money to do all of that. I hope, though, I haven't looked back at what they're doing, but this kind of talk about reforming and taking these things away is, again, so counterproductive.
You know, and you say that, and I remember when I was young, in the Stone Age, we had a police officer, I mean, to this day, Artie Russo, I'll never forget. He used to take us to hockey. He played hockey with us. There was never a thing about, it's Officer Russo. You knew it was. You had respect for him.
Right.
But he showed respect for the kids. Yep. And, you know, the fact that I'm sitting here at almost 64 years old and I still remember that police officer and the impact he had tells me it works. Tell me about voting. Big hoop to do about.
Yes,
and
yes.
I don't understand, because I've been voting by mail. Mm-hmm. When I was working an hour and a half away, it was inconvenient. I mean, I would have still done it, but when Amy Neves at the town hall said, you know you can vote absentee. Okay, so that means I don't have to take huge time out of work to drive here. So for years I've been doing this.
Sure.
Now all of a sudden I'm told it could be a problem.
And I'm going to tell you what happens, and a lot of people, it's because they don't fully understand what the process is. So when you vote absentee voting, if you vote early voting, for instance, you'll vote your envelope, which has your name on it, and I think your party, I don't want to be swore to that because I'll get the I gotcha when I go on the next TV show, okay? It has your name on it. Now, you're voting locally. Look at a town like Milford. It's a small town. You know, they're looking, say, I wonder how he votes. Those ballots are kept and then delivered back to the precinct the night of election night, and they're opened up by a human being who takes those ballots and puts those ballots in the machine on your behalf. Now, again, your name is on the envelope, and I don't think a lot of people realize that's what happens. I have concerns of where those ballots are kept in the meantime. what's the safety of them? Now, with the mail-in ballots, another difficulty. We're hearing all over the place of harvesting ballots. I know it's true that they're going and they'll take ballots, like for instance, if they're delivered somewhere, let's just say there's a nursing home that closed down, and I know there have been some because I've tried to write out to some of them, and for some reason, those registrations weren't changed and updated in the system, and the system oftentimes is lagged. All of those ballots may get delivered there, and yet here they sit, somebody comes along, there they are, there's an opportunity for fraud there. I can tell you from my personal experience when I tried to get on this ballot that there was a few things that happened to me that I was very disappointed, I'll use that word, okay? I was very disappointed about things that happened, and I strongly felt, and I did report it to the Secretary of the State, that there were some huge, huge problems. I'll give you one for instance. So there's a box in the lobby, and it says, you put your ballots here, or put your signatures here. All 11 Democrats were using the same box. This wasn't a box that had a lock on it. It was a copy paper box. I lifted up the lid. I threw my papers in there. I looked in. There were probably a few more there. Nobody around. Nobody around.
But see, that to me is just silly.
That is silly.
I mean, a master lock for $2.80 could fix that problem.
Absolutely. But here, I'm concerned. Yeah. I'm concerned. What's going to happen? And then, I've had I knew exactly, being the good officer that I am, I knew exactly how many ballots I delivered to each city and town. The way the process normally works is you will meet with the clerk will count, you'll count, you all go away saying this is exactly it. We found places where the clerks weren't even there. They weren't there, and they had to be called to come in. But part of that is because their city hall was closed, and we had to go back to the Secretary of State and say, this is an elections day, we have till 5 o'clock. I ran around to 34 cities and towns in this district 3 times delivering my signatures. So to me, if somebody told me that mine weren't delivered or if there was a problem with it, I made sure I checked it very carefully.
We could go on forever.
Exactly.
But we're getting to the end, and I have to ask you the question.
Yes.
Jules, I'm from Milford.
Yes.
Why should I vote for you?
I don't have to pretend that I'm from here. I don't have to pretend that I have shared values with the people in this area. I am one of you. My voice for you is a choice that we have not had in a long time. My voice for you is one that can't be bought, and I'm going to say that. We've had people from very, very, I'm not just talking richer people with more money, extremely affluent people. I'm not saying that they're bad people. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is that I am in more of a position to know what the people in this area have. My parents struggled. I think the majority of people, they struggle. So I'm one of you. That's one. My military experience, I think, is very important. And the fact that I started off as an airman and as a woman, and I struggled up. I raised a young child. As a single parent, I know what it's like to be a parent. I wanted him to have great schools to go to. I wanted him to have a safe neighborhood to live in. I wanted him to have excellent schools to go to. And I wanted him, when he finally graduated, to have the opportunity to have a great job and a great career. That transcends any party. I don't think there's anyone that can argue out there that those are things that all of us share here in Milford and through the rest of the district.
Well, again, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And to our 6 loyal viewers, as always, may God bless. I've always promised I'd never ask you to vote for any specific candidate, but I'll beg you to get to know the candidates and make sure you vote.
Thank you.
Whichever way you go, it's important to pick somebody that feels right, that feels like you, so that when they go out down to Washington and represent us, that they're making the choices that we feel comfortable with. So as always, may God bless. Good night. May tomorrow be a better night than tonight. Thank you.
And thank you for having me. Thank you. Great discussion.
too long since I've been home. Been running all my life just